First of all, unity in general, and specifically unity today, the music, the meditation, it all speaks so explicitly to what I want to talk about with you today. And so I'm just delighted that this is being supported by everything around us. And I gotta confess, I yearn to be an extemporaneous speaker like Mary Myers. It's a high dream of mine. I'm not yet there, so I have some notes, and I beg your indulgence as I sort of work from my notes too. I'm delighted to be here in this one-way conversation about a topic that's very important to me. And it's also a topic I believe is important to our world. And this topic is the notion of how do we create healing in a world that is so often polarized, you know. And I want to start with our mission, which we've already said moments ago, but I want to remind us again because it speaks to the heart of what we're here for in this talk. Our mission is to awaken to and embrace the divine essence of all beings through prayer and service in our community and in the world. So my question to myself is, how do you do this when in vehement disagreement with the ideas of others, with their behaviors, with their morality, and with their very being? How do you do this? You know, in situations where we find ourselves in that kind of vehement opposition with another, where like two cats arching their backs and hissing at each other, two things are happening. First, where different points of view, realities, and customs intersect, we often experience suspicion, antagonism, and the act of othering. In other words, othering someone else. They are seen as an other and are therefore different than me. And I do this, and I believe we all do this at some point. As a result, our stance is to either engage with our spears sharpened and our shields up, or to avoid each other at all costs. So that's one thing. The other is we align ourselves with others who share our own points of view, our own realities, and our own customs, as we remain separate and keep our own company, as we reinforce the correctness of our own homogeneous group and see the problem with the other side. These practices lead to splitting and separation between people in our outside world, and quite frankly, if we dare to look, we may even notice it in our inner world as well. As we not only engage in this kind of polarizing towards others, we also do the exact same thing within ourselves. That's how we learn non-acceptance of the other in our interactive world. We learn it from learning from non-acceptance towards certain parts of ourselves. But the inner game of polarization is a topic for another day. So let's instead focus on the consensus reality of our relationships with the outer world. I want to tell you a little bit about my own story because it's a huge reference point to this question. The question, how can we humans bridge the divisions and the separateness that lead to conflict and turmoil in our world today? I was born child number 3 of 5 children in a family that others would say had lively dinner time conversations, which may otherwise be understood often as an atmosphere of intensity and anger. As the middle child, and with the zodiac sign of Libra, which I know nothing about other than it has these scales, and these scales seem very pertinent to my life. The unofficial title in the family that I took on without knowing was the peacekeeper. In an argument between two siblings, I would say, "Oh, you have a good point." And then I'd turn to the other and say, "Oh, but you have a good point too." And I'd often get angry at myself for being wishy-washy and not taking a stand. And this criticism of myself lasted for a long time until I realized that that's not a fault, that is a bridge. As a 4-year-old, there's a family story of us walking in the woods and with my younger brother lagging far behind while my parents and older siblings marched ahead. I would cover 4 times the distance of others as I ran back and forth and said, "Pat, hurry up." And then I ran forward saying, "Please slow down." Always seeking to bridge the gap between family members. Same kind of thing happened in school growing up with my peers. I'd always be looking to see what's going on both sides. And I carried this quality into college as a comparative religious philosophy major, with a great interest in learning more about how to bridge the human experience with a rich experience of the divine. After that, I ended up as a clinical social worker and a marriage and family therapist, starting out working in foster care in a very spicy neighborhood in Brooklyn, seeking to keep kids with their families who are often in crisis and at risk of losing their kids to the foster care system. Again, seeking to be a bridge between kid and family, and a bridge between family and the system. I then moved on from the world of therapy and clinical social work and became a co-active coach and a leadership consultant, coaching clients to come to terms with their own wholeness and working with leaders and teams around the world to reach satisfying levels of a positive and enriching life while being true to their life purpose, their values, and their goals. Where am I? Let's see. The focus in this work has always been to help create a bridge between one's identity on the one hand. Who am I when I'm aligned with my highest self? And who am I when I'm aligned with my purpose as well? And the question is, what is mine to do? So fast forward, last year I quit a full-time job, temporarily left my spouse and family behind, and on a cold February morning, I hooked up a tiny teardrop trailer and went on a 3-month solo camping adventure. And I was seeking in part to free myself of the arrogance and ignorance of an older, privileged, northern white male in order to learn more about the current American South and my country's history leading up to, including, and following our Civil War. I was particularly interested in seeing how where we are today as a country is reflected in where we were in the period from the 1850s through the 1920s, where there was a strong quality of intense division and the consciousness of separation prevailed. While on this journey, I walked a path of foot soldiers in both the Confederate and Union armies, walking across the battlefields of death, gaining just a small slice of what it might have been like for them, and doing this while crossing the battlegrounds and killing fields of places like Gettysburg, Antietam, Manassas, Harper's Ferry, Monocacy, Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Vicksburg, Fort Sumter, Kennesaw Mountain, Petersburg, Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, Andersonville, Cold Harbor, the Wilderness, Sailors Creek, Richmond, and more. So there's a lot of walking. I spent days in rural Mississippi along the Tallahatchie River learning about the lynching of Emmett Till. I paddled on bayous filled with alligators, Spanish moss, and glorious bird life with a Louisiana Southern boy who is a friend and a colleague seeking to understand a mindset that I was unfamiliar with. I explored the civil rights era in the South, studying the horrendous period of lynching, leaving a powerful and lasting impact upon me while in Montgomery, Alabama. And I followed the history of the bombings of black citizens and leaders in Birmingham in the early 1960s. I did this while making some, but not enough, connections with Southerners from all walks of life, whether in walking the battlefields, in campgrounds, in diners, in museums, in stores, and in town squares. I returned home with an avid hunger to do my part in healing the divisions that constantly crop up in our world, starting with healing my own finger-wagging tendencies to make wrong others who see things differently than me. And to do this through a strengthened relationship with Spirit. For unless this work is done from a Spirit-centered place, it just becomes effortful, and it risks creating a gap or a trap for the ego that poses as an enlightened do-gooder. In a moment of synchronicity, soon after returning home, I received an email from this organization called Braver Angels. And as an organization that is fast becoming a social movement, it is dedicated to bridging divisions in our highly polarized world. This email came with an invitation for me to attend their annual convention, in which an equal number of people who identify as red or conservative and as blue or liberal or progressive, these are who attend for the purpose of forming and holding meaningful connection, while often not surrendering their own particular position on a politically contentious topic. How do you do that? 700 people showed up from around the country, 350 reds and 350 blues, and this was life-changing for me. It was as if God or the universe noted my intensified desire to help in healing the divide following my adventure south, and timed this invitation to attend the convention at exactly the right time. And so, if today, as others have said, if you're interested, you're warmly invited for an hour conversation about what Braver Angels is all about. I want to make a distinction, though, between polarity and polarization. A polarity simply means two or more things that are different from each other, the plus and minus sides of a battery, night and day, male and female, etc. That's polarity. It's neutral. It just is. Polarization, as I refer to it here, includes a non-acceptance of the other and an insistence on the one side or the other. So let's create a polarizing situation right here, right now, shall we? A simple experience. Play with me, if you will. Let's divide the sanctuary right in half, right down this line. And we're going to just imagine, if you will. One side, let's call it this side. You're the warm weather side. You insist that you must always be in warm weather no matter what, that the world needs warm weather, and that you will do anything you can to ensure that we have this. Now, if you're actually a cold weather person, please pretend while we're just doing this little thing. Okay. Over here, welcome to the cool side. You are the cold weather people. You say that, those warm weather people are just, they're driving climate change. And we want to keep it cool and cold. Yes. So now, if you will, just take a breath and sink into the correctness of your side, would you? Now, I want to invite you to just hold one hand out like this, like I'm doing. Hold one hand out. And I can't hear you?
Which hand? Does it matter? Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. No. Okay. So if you hold one hand out, thinking of how correct your side is. And if you make a fist, imagine that you're holding in your fist your stake, your belief in this weather preference. Now, if you squeeze it tightly and think about how wrong the other side is and how you must protect and defend your side at all costs, here's one other thing to add to this, and then we'll stop. Just if you're on this side, lean a little bit away from them and lean a little bit away from them. Really feel the tension there, okay? So, you may notice just in this contrived little exercise some aspect of your own life that you really care about and for which anything other than your perspective is clearly not okay. As humans, we stand in polarities all the time. It is actually how we navigate through our world. By virtue of the fact that we live in a three-dimensional world in which I am here and you are there, we operate in different realities. It's normal. if walking towards each other on the sidewalk, we would notice the difference between you and me, there is no wrong here. We simply become aware that we can distinguish one thing, one person, one point of view from another. There is a natural polarity here, me at one end and you at the other. Now the challenge is that in certain situations, we don't simply notice the objective other. We add on an interpretation of what that other represents. It's not infrequent that this begins a process of moving from forming an interpretation about the other, or we call that opinion, to moving from there to actually having an attitude. And from having an attitude towards the other to establishing a belief about the other at a most foundational level. When I'm not aware of myself, I'm not just looking at you from a place of noticing otherness in a neutral way. I've formed an opinion that is reflected by an attitude and which is reinforced by a belief that my view of whatever it is I'm looking at is the correct one. Any sense of curiosity and mystery, it diminishes. And thus, I've created a very narrow view of my world. So what's the antidote? Well, I want to share an example of bridging the divide and forming connection in the face of polarization, not unlike these beautiful songs that we've sung today. I have a friend and colleague named Eric, who is Jewish and who is a newly acknowledged Zionist. He's become aware in ways he never knew before of the intergenerational trauma that has been activated in him from people long before him, in his family and his people. Activated in him now in ways that have surprised and deeply affected him, not only as a result of the attack on October 7th, but in witnessing the anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish, and pro-Palestinian protests going on in universities in this country and around the world. The October 7th, and most significantly to him, the following protests have crystallized aspects of his identity and sharpened his opinions, his attitudes, and foundational beliefs about how he sees the world and how he feels the world sees him as a Jew, often in anti-Semitic ways. Now, the wonderful thing about Eric is that he openly admits to having a newly developed intense bias or belief that's developed from an attitude and an opinion around his Jewish identity. In recognizing and then admitting that this is a strong belief and a bias and not the sole reality, it has allowed him to engage in conversations with Amel. Amel is a Palestinian colleague of ours, and they have engaged in conversation with each other in the frankest of terms. They now have regular conversations about their disagreements over the Israel-Palestinian conflict, conversations that are often painful. However, they both come to these conversations with a desire to stay engaged, to stay curious, and to listen to each other's story, to hear each other's pain. While there is still a nearly 180-degree difference of opinion in how they experience and perceive their worlds, they have opened a slice of possibility that includes appreciation, respect, and even love for each other. Now, coming back to Mary's example of this today, imagine the family, your family, at a table at Thanksgiving. Think of that real or imagined family member who really irritates us with their point of view, which can lead to either a fight, a flight, or a freeze response within us as we find ourselves engaged in an either-or situation in which either the other is right or I am right. What if we put an and in between the other person and ourselves instead of an or? What if I knew deep in my body that I was fully entitled to my beliefs, to my point of view, and that I could engage the other without feeling a need to change their mind or think of them and their personhood as being wrong? What if, calling upon our mission here at Unity, I truly awakened to and embraced their divinity? I did that while also calling upon my own inner warrior to hold my own, to be our best selves, We don't shrink or diminish ourselves or betray ourselves by assuming a fighting posture or fleeing the scene when faced with a polarizing situation. And then, what if we connect it to spirit? While in the name of depolarizing myself, it seems like a good thing to consider the possibility of both holding my ground and seeing the divine in others at the human-to-human level. But something more is needed. For me, and I believe for all of us, developing a prayer practice, a pause practice, an ongoing conversation with God, asking for partnership with Spirit here, in order to hold the both and of relationship with an other when we do not see eye to eye. This is essential. I seek the God within and without to give me courage to have my opinion and believe in myself and to hold on to my stake. And I ask God within and without for me to have an open heart, to simultaneously lean forward with curiosity and commitment, to make room for that which is different or even disagreeable to me. New York Times columnist David Brooks, in a recent op-ed, he said this: "To be a good citizen, it is necessary to be warm-hearted, to listen to each other, and to respect each other. We often fail at these moral disciplines." And these are disciplines. Howard Thurman, a beautiful theologian and a contemporary of Martin Luther King Sr., said, "We are here dealing with a discipline, a method, a technique, instead of some form of wishful thinking or simple desiring. We are invited into the discipline of holding our own and courageously committing to each other. And when I open and yield and surrender to something greater than me, this practice is an expression of grace." So please join me. Grab your stake in your fist again. Open yourself to something bigger than you, than us. Hold on tight, knowing that this is you respecting yourself and what you stand for. And now lean toward the other side. Let Spirit in. Open your heart. Be curious. Have courage. Seek friendship and understanding. And let's see what happens. Thank you.